Hello and welcome to AviaDev Inside Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, Jon Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. Today, we are offering something a little bit different, which is a deep dive into the Connecting Africa report, a report that was published at AviaDev in Zanzibar last year. Now, we're going to revisit this report with one of the authors, Theo Wensink, who is the head of Airline Marketing, Middle East and Africa at Embraer. And he's going to share some details about the report itself before we then count down the top 10 O&Ds with a little twist. And that twist is that those of you watching on YouTube will see that we are delighted to say that our resident commentators from our very popular Connectivity Update podcast that we do monthly, that is Behramjee, Ghadially and Sean Mendis, are joining us to help provide some context and also identify any potential carriers for some of these routes that are still sitting there unserved but with decent demand. Now, ultimately, they're going to let us know if any of these routes will ever take off. And of course, all of their opinions and comments are their own. So fasten your seatbelts for around an hour of insight, analysis and commentary, and welcome to the podcast. So, Theo, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Good morning, John. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Fantastic. So before we bring in Sean and Behramjee, I think it's really important to inform the listeners how and why we created the report. So I think start us off with Embraer's footprint on the continent and obviously how this whole report came about in the first place.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to, first of all, to give us the opportunity to present the report at AviaDev back in June. I think it was really a great presentation, generated a lot of interest from airlines. We've been using this report and airlines have been asking about it. We've been sharing it with them over the last months. And now we're here to really deep dive into the report. I think really the reason why this report was born and how it started is because Embraer has actually been present in Africa for many years, since 1978 to be more precise. The first Embraer in Africa was an Embraer 110 Banderante with Air Afrique Gabon. And actually, funny enough, this aircraft retired just a few years ago in Kenya, if I'm not wrong. So we have been present for many years in the continent, and I was checking the numbers this morning, and currently on the continent, we have approximately 270 aircraft currently flying, this going from the turboprops to the 50-seater ERJs to the E-jets up to the E2. We have roughly 60 airline customers on the continent. So a very large footprint going from Northern Africa to Southern Africa, also East and West. I will not go into specific airlines' names, but very big footprint. And maybe just a few more points on the latest developments in the region. As all of you know, the last E2 customer in Africa is Airlink, with currently, as we're speaking now, 3 E2 flying, still a backlog for another 7. And last year, we also had an order from Air Côte d'Ivoire for some E175s. I know you talked about it. So as you can see, we're very present on the continent with a very great outlook, a lot of interest for the 100 to 150 seater aircraft. Airlines are really using these aircraft to develop connectivity, open new routes. We're going to talk about this, but also develop the hubs. From all the interactions I've been having over the last years at Embraer, I've been with Embraer for 7 years working in Africa. In my discussions with airlines, activity has always been a fundamental part of the discussions. These airlines want to know what can they do with our aircraft, what can they do better, what are the opportunities. And this is really how the report was born. It was to identify the opportunities for intra-regional connectivity in Africa. And I think also another aspect is really to reframe the discussion from what's not working. We often hear in the continent what's not working, and move it to a more positive and optimistic discussion, highlighting where the opportunity is. So all in all, we wanted to highlight the untapped potential for intra-African connectivity and also to provide data-driven guidance and insights for airlines and stakeholders. We're going to go, of course, into more details as we speak, but just to give a bit more context. In terms of the untapped potential for intra-African connectivity, I would highlight that nowadays about 36% of the markets intra-Africa have more than one daily flight. So only 36% have more than a daily flight. This really shows the potential to increase frequencies. And as we're going to see and as we highlight in the report, we have identified 45 markets which are currently not served in Africa, which represent direct opportunity for airlines. And then something else, of course, it's interesting to highlight the routes which are not served, but it's going to be also important for airlines to understand, okay, what can I get out of this route once it's open? And something quite new which we are bringing in the report is the African stimulation curve. And this is a tool which the objective is to really give airline leaders a tool to estimate by how much a route or a market can grow and what's the potential market you can capture once you open a new route. And I think maybe just to finish and linking a bit this to Brazil, which is where Embraer is from. In Brazil, we have an airline which is called Azul, and Azul has built its success on operating routes which were not operated by any of the other big carriers, such as Gol and Latam. So they created their network based on monopolies, which are not flying out of the big cities like Sao Paulo, Rio, and Brasilia. And this is, I think, a very nice example of how addressing these routes, which are not currently operated by airlines, can be a great success for airlines.
Yeah, fantastic. Great start to kick us off. So for everybody listening, there is a link to download the report. So that will be in the show notes. You can also watch Theo's presentation from Zanzibar. That's on our YouTube channel as well. I think as well, what's really important for us that you said is what I've always wanted to do with our platform is to be as optimistic as possible and not focus and dwell on the challenges and everything that's wrong, but see those as opportunities. And that was why when we sat down, we said, let's spin this around and let's really think about how do we work together. And Embraer is a very optimistic OEM. You've been partners of ours for the full 10 years that we've been going at AviaDev, and we'll be forever grateful for that as well. And this was just a really perfect place to sort of come together and have a report that can be released at AviaDev that talks around exactly what we're all about, which is improved connectivity. Now, the full methodology is, of course, included in the report itself, but can you just summarize it for the listeners and the viewers, Theo, before we then get into the analysis? Just talk us through how you did this, and you've talked about the stimulation curve and things, but yeah, give us an overview.
Sure. Well, first of all, I would like to highlight that this is really a teamwork of Embraer. I did this together with my colleagues from the Embraer consulting team back in Brazil. Special shout out to my colleague Renato, who was very helpful with this analysis. He's a very knowledgeable guy with a lot of experience. So this is really the result of big teamwork at Embraer. Yeah, in terms of the methodology, I would like to highlight two parts. First of all, the stimulation curve. For this, we looked at the past 10 years of historical data on OAG Sabre. So we looked at traffic data, and we looked at every single route which was not operated and by how much traffic increased after opening the route. So, for example, if a certain market had, let's say, and I'm making this up, 10 passengers per day each way flying through with a stopover, and then once this route is operated directly, the direct traffic would double, so from 10 to 20. This would give us a stimulation factor of 2. So this is how we built this stimulation curve. We looked at every single route which has been opened over the last 10 years in Africa and by how much the traffic then increases. So that's how we have this very nice stimulation curve. And then in terms of the top 10 or let's say the opportunities in terms of routes which are not open, what we did is so the report was published in June 25 at AviaDev. So the cutoff date was April 25 in terms of date. So we looked at the traffic data and traffic and schedule data from May 24 to April 25. And we looked at all the routes which were not operated with a direct flight. We ranked these from the highest to the lowest in terms of passengers per day each way. We put a cut at around 9 passengers per day each way, because this is where we believe the limit is in terms of justifying direct services with a 50 to 70 seater. And one important point to mention is that flights with a stopover, we don't consider these as a direct flight. So we're really looking at non-stop flights. Maybe just to finish, we also did not look at any traffic rights implications, as the idea here is really to show what the market is demanding, what the African travelers are asking for. We are, of course, aware that there are some traffic rights implications, but we did not look into this.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, as soon as you start getting into the geopolitics and the traffic rights, it takes away from the data itself. Right, fantastic. So we've set the scene. We know what the methodology is. We know what the reason we did this. So I think what we want to do now is get into the meat of the report. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to count down from 10 to 1. So if you haven't opened up the report yet, don't, because obviously, of course, it will spoil the surprise, although I'm sure many of you have seen it already. And the way we're going to do it is I'll say what the route is. Theo's going to provide a little bit of a sort of context on that. And then, of course, we'll bring in Sean and Behramjee to talk about what the opportunities are, whether there are any carriers that potentially could do this, and whether they think it's a viable option. At number 10, I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to do a countdown and work as a radio DJ. So this is quite exciting. At number 10, coming in at number 10 is Brazzaville to Dakar. Theo, talk to us about this. Give us a little bit of context, and then we'll bring in Behramjee first, and Sean can add a bit.
Indeed. So number 10 is Brazzaville to Dakar. That's around 4,100 kilometers. And we see it as a very strategic West to Central African link with a big focus on government diplomatic travel. We know Dakar has a few important African institutions. There's also a lot of trade on this route. But tourism is quite limited. Currently, no non-stop flights. Obviously, if passengers want to go from Brazzaville to Dakar, they need to fly through other African cities. This usually means it's quite a longer journey and more expensive. In 2024, between 24 and 25, in this period we see 19 passengers per day each way. So that's around 140 passengers per week each way. And using the stimulation curve, if an airline were to open this route, we could expect around 35 passengers per day each way. So given this forecasted passenger per day each way, or this demand, we believe that this market could sustain around roughly 3 weekly flights with a 100-seater.
Fantastic. Right. Behramjee, talk to us. You obviously had some time working in Senegal. So yeah, talk to us about this route. You're on mute at the moment. So if you want to unmute, and away you go.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Theo and John. Thank you for the explanation and your report. With regards to Brazzaville to Dakar, majority of the passengers, from my experience with Air Senegal, though we did not fly that route, but majority of the passengers are traders and students. The ethnic community between the two countries is not that big. It's mainly traders and students. And the airline that used to fly between the two cities was a privately owned Senegalese airline called Transair. But they used to offer a multi-hop bus-like service, Dakar, Bamako, Cotonou, Brazzaville. Then they changed it to Dakar, Bamako, Abidjan, Brazzaville. Now, Dakar, Brazzaville, if flown non-stop, is 5 hours, 35 minutes block time, which is easily possible on an Embraer E95 or an E90 E2. However, from a commercial standpoint, that route would only make sense if it was flown via an intermediate point. Like, for example, either Bamako or Cotonou or Libreville, for example. It won't make sense being flown direct non-stop unless, in a best case scenario, Air Senegal was a mini Ethiopian Airlines type carrier with a proper hub in Dakar, which would connect multiple European cities, New York, Bamako, Conakry, etc., etc. but reality is different from theory. I can see Sean is making different facial expressions. So yeah, it is a route which has definitely a good potential. And also remember, a lot of the Dakar Brazzaville passengers, they don't end their journey in Brazzaville. They also go to Kinshasa by boat, by getting off at Brazzaville and then taking the ferry across, as well as others buy a separate domestic ticket to go to Point Noir and a few other cities over there. So I agree fully with you that there is definitely potential, but a proper airline would need to service it nonstop. And right now, EC Air of Congo and Air Senegal are not in the position to do that, unfortunately. So ASky and Air Cote d'Ivoire will reap the rewards.
Right. Sean?
Actually, I'm pretty much in agreement with that. I think that Congo Brazzaville, obviously Brazzaville by extension, is not a particularly large market for travel to West Africa. And, I'm looking at the list of the various destinations that are strong from Brazzaville. And certainly Abidjan is strong, but other than Abidjan, you're looking at the Parises, Dubais, Beiruts, Guangzhous. There isn't a huge amount of ties to Francophone West Africa in that high, in those numbers. And consequently, I have my doubts about the stimulation factor up to 35. I think, as Behramjee's pointed out, the type of travel that exists is not really that prone to stimulation in terms of stimulation on the basis of direct services. I think stimulation on the basis of price will stimulate anything in Africa, but I'm not entirely convinced that that this is something where 100 or 100 plus seater is going to make that much of a huge difference. Now, again, with a strong hub in Dakar with connections, say, onto Paris, with connections on, well, I think Paris is pretty much the only westbound destination that is strong from Brazza, because everything else is to the east, Dubai, Beirut, Guangzhou, etc. Potentially, there could be a feeder there if there were a stronger network. But I think this is a route where there is a low-hanging fruit right now, but that fruit may not quite be ripe enough to pick and eat. This market probably needs to grow a bit more before it would make sense for someone to actually invest in that. I think this market is probably well served right now with daily connections via ASky in Lomé. And also, importantly, and just I was looking at the elapsed times. The elapsed time going via Lomé is about 3 hours longer than the non-stop flight would be. So the non-stop, as Behramjee said, is just short of 6 hours, while it is around 9 hours to go through Lomé, based on the current schedules. However, and this is a route where I think Air Cote d'Ivoire's new order for the E175s could potentially be very interesting because, I know Air Cote d'Ivoire is using the E175s primarily as a replacement for their Dash 8 fleet. But using those 175s, even though I'm not a huge fan of that order, I think the 175, they would probably have been better off going for a larger gauge. But since they've committed to the 175, I think this kind of route through an Abidjan hub actually allows them to increase their frequencies and potentially offer a more competitive one-stop connection than what ASky is offering with a much larger gauge 737-800 through through Lomé. So certainly, I think there is potential for this market. I don't think the potential is right there today to be able to launch a nonstop on what is effectively almost a 6-hour flight for what is sub 30 ppdw. I don't think, there isn't the right aircraft or market size for this to make sense today. But it's one to watch because undoubtedly with stimulation, there will come a time when that fruit is ripe for the picking.
Great. Last word to you, Behramjee.
Yes, just to clarify one thing that Sean mentioned, Sky, they fly to Brazzaville via Kinshasa. So there's a capacity on board is shared between the two cities, and their night stop in Brazzaville. It's not even for Sky, Brazzaville is not a direct flight. It goes via Kinshasa because they know Brazzaville cannot fill up on its own, unfortunately. And also for other reasons, because Kinshasa is not
it's not a bad, it's not a big market in general. It is dwarfed by Kinshasa, its neighbor. It is a much smaller market in general. People fly directly to Brazza simply because getting from Kinshasa to Brazza on that ferry is not a very pleasant experience.
Yes, and the biggest market for West Africa is Bamako, as seen in Theo's sheet.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, let's park that one. But I think what we're already seeing here is, and you said it, Theo, as well. It's not an exact science, and there's so many things that go in, and that's why you've got to get the ground truth, and also the stimulation factor is an average. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, some are going to overperform, some are going to underperform. It's not 100%. But it's fascinating. So thank you, guys. Right, let's move on to number 9. So coming in at number 9 is Douala to Dakar. So Theo, over to you again. Give us some context, and then I think we'll go to Behramjee again first on this one. No offense, Sean. You can have the next one.
Of course. No. So number 9 is Douala, Behramjee's hometown. I've been there. Thanks, Behramjee, for showing me the best restaurants there. Douala to Dakar. That's slightly over 3,000 kilometers. Both cities are big ports and commercial hubs with a combined population of over 6 million inhabitants. So 2 big cities. We see growing trades in logistics, infrastructure. There's also a strong VFR travel, especially among business diaspora and regional professionals. Currently, no direct service. Usually, in this route, Abidjan is used for connections. So far, around 20 passengers per day each way. And using the stimulation factor, we would also expect around 35 passengers per day each way, which would mean around roughly 3 weekly flights on a 100-seater.
Fantastic. Behramjee, come on. This is your current country and the country that you've obviously been involved in as well. So what do you think about this one?
Behramjee is the most qualified person in the world to talk about this route, so go on.
Well, that's true, possibly.
So Douala, I launched with Air Senegal in 2021. The route was flown via Cotonou and was extended onwards to Libreville. The reason for that is very simple. The Dakar-Douala market could not be sustained by itself using an A320 or even A319. We needed a tag-on service. The original plan was to just do Dakar, Libreville, Douala and back. But because of aircraft constraints and we had to fly to Cotonou also, we decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and increase the gauge by putting a 321 on the service. And to be very frank with you, because in 2021, Camerco was not operating properly, ASky was still getting its feet back together, Rwandair was also getting its feet back together. We had a monopoly on Douala-Libreville as well as on Cotonou-Douala sector. And the A321 with its XX belly cargo space and the passenger board capacity, the route did quite well for the first year and a half. As more and more competition came about, the loads dropped a bit as well as the yields. If Air Senegal had an 90 right now, the route would definitely make sense on a non-stop basis. The E90 sized airplane for a Dakar to Douala flight non-stop in both directions would make perfect sense, offering connections via Dakar to Casablanca, Bamako, Conakry. But a larger gauged aircraft, even a larger gauge like a 95 would need a tag-on service. Dakar-Douala, again, there is some ethnic traffic on this route. We have a lot of Cameroonian and Senegalese restaurants in both countries. There's a good amount of VFR also. But remember that the Douala-Dakar market also has a lot of Yaoundé passengers flying from it as well. And we don't have that many students in Senegal from Cameroon. It's basically traders and VFR. And the reason why this market has not grown like how others could have in West Africa is because it's not easy getting a Cameroonian visa for Senegalese passport holders. Getting a Congo Brazzaville visa is much, much easier for Senegalese passport holders. So that also plays a part. So that is
very good.
Short analysis.
Yeah, very good. Anything to add, Sean, or because Behramjee's the expert?
No, I think Behramjee and Theo have summed it up pretty accurately. Again, as Theo said, this is one of the routes actually where Air Cote d'Ivoire pulls their weight as a hub a lot stronger than ASky does, which surprised me when I looked at the raw data initially. I'd have thought that ASky was quite dominant given that they've really tried strongly to push into the Douala market. So I think that was a bit of interesting data that Theo had mentioned, and that obviously is backed up by the numbers. I'd actually think that this is a more feasible route than a Brazzaville route. I think that as Behramjee pointed out, is more of a potential latent demand to Douala from Dakar than there is to Brazzaville, and I think that it's probably more open to stimulation. So I think right aircraft, right time. Unfortunately, neither Air Senegal nor Camerco are going to be the right person to implement that. So it's going to take someone else to have to come in if we're going to see this route opening nonstop. I don't think either of those airlines are in a position to place an order for E2s and launch this near five and a bit hour sector, anytime in the foreseeable future.
Okay, right. So we're 0 for 2, but never say never on that. The next one, though, is quite interesting. So I will introduce, and then you can go first on this one, Sean. So that coming in at number 8 is Cape Town to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So Theo, talk us through this one, and then Sean can give us some of the...
Indeed. So number 8, Cape Town to Dar es Salaam, 3,680 kilometers. This is quite an interesting route. It's very highly focused on leisure and tourism, and especially with a growing middle class in both countries, we're seeing a lot of activity there. Also trade in wine, textile also to some extent. And I was talking about leisure. This is both ways, whether Tanzanians going to Cape Town on holidays, but also South Africans to Zanzibar or Serengeti. Currently, no direct flights, and most of the traffic is routed through Johannesburg or Nairobi. So far, we have around 20 passengers per day each way, so similar to the 2 first routes. And in this case, we would also expect around 36 passengers per day each way. So we believe that this route could sustain 3 weekly flights with a 100-seater.
Okay, fantastic. Right, Sean, talk to us. What's happened since this report came out?
Well, I think the key thing which has changed since this report comes out is that Air Tanzania have launched this service in December, twice weekly with a 737-900. To be fair, the aircraft type is basically a toss of a coin. They could run an A739, they could run a A220. We haven't yet seen the 787, but that's probably because they just forgot. Air Tanzania is very hard to predict, and they don't often do things with logic. The interesting thing, though, on this one, and when I looked in terms of the elapsed times and things, is that this market, and as Theo said, a bulk of passengers tend to fly through Johannesburg for this. And the elapsed time savings between a non-stop flight and a connection in Johannesburg is actually minimal. It's just over 1 hour. And Johannesburg is actually very close to the Great Circle route between Cape Town and Dar es Salaam. With Johannesburg to Dar es Salaam being served by South African Airways, by Airlink, by Air Tanzania, I am not entirely convinced that this market will be a success for, definitely not for Air Tanzania, because pretty much anything they do is not going to be a success. But it may be a market that Airlink considers doing with their E2195s once those begin more long-haul operations from Cape Town. However, if I were a betting person, I'm going to actually bet on them trying Cape Town to Zanzibar rather than Cape Town to Dar es Salaam over there, because I think that the business ties which drive Dar es Salaam traffic are going to be more reliant on frequency. And that daily frequency with not a very inconvenient connection is available through Johannesburg. In fact, more than daily services. You can choose who you're going to connect with one stop without too much elapsed time difference. But I think that the leisure passenger going specifically to Zanzibar may actually lean more towards that. If I were a betting person, I'm going to say that Airlink is going to use their E2s at some point. May not be in 26, maybe in 27 or whatever. But I would see that Cape Town to Zanzibar likely to open up on Airlink with the E2s, which once they begin to use the E2s from their Cape Town base, which they have assured me is in there, although their first 3 E2s are in a single class high density configuration, and this may not be the optimal configuration for their Cape Town long hauls. So it may not be these aircraft, but at some point when they get the one of the remaining 7 in, we might see something.
Yeah, great analysis. And absolutely, I think that is the key and the case with those 10 aircraft, with the 3 that have arrived, and of course the 7 that are coming, is that Airlink get a lot more say over the next 7 as to how they're going to be configured. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So quite exciting, obviously. It is served, but potentially there's going to be some competition on here. Anything to add from your side, Behramjee?
Yes, I feel that Cape Town, Dar es Salaam, if flown by Airlink using an E90, would do well for them 3 times a week. They would take care of Air Tanzania and eventually get rid of them on this route. 15,000 passengers flew between Cape Town and Dar es Salaam last year, and it grew from 15,000 the prior year. So with a proper airline flying it, as well as offering domestic South Africa connections via Cape Town, which are also offered via Johannesburg, I feel that Airlink is best positioned to make this route viable using an E90, perhaps E95, but the E90 is perfectly suited for this route. It's a 5-hour, 5-minute block time. So Theo, just clarify for the viewers, 5 hours on an E90 E1 is perfectly doable, correct? With a full payload.
5 hours on an E190 E1, that's
Yeah.
challenging. On an E2, no problem. E1, I
Yes.
think
Okay.
would need to look into it, but I wouldn't count on
Okay.
that.
Okay. So then
I
it would
mean,
have to be on
I've
an E.
looked at that. It's 2,000 nautical miles there, Ramjay. Yeah, it's 2,000 nautical miles. That is a significant stretch for the E1, even in a two-class configuration like Airlink has most of their fleet.
Right. Yes. So another option, as Sean has mentioned in our AviaDev podcast previously, is Cape Town Dar es Salaam can also be an incremental night flying utilization option being used by Airlink if they base some of their E2s at Cape Town Airport. So that could also be one option. But definitely Cape Town Dar es Salaam, the route does have potential, and with more non-stop service, the simulation factor will be there.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll make sure that Airlink have a meeting with the Tanzanian Airport Authority at AviaDev, and I'm
John,
sure they have previously. Yes.
You forgot to say something very important.
Go on then.
Why would the Cape Town people go to Zanzibar?
Well, it's got to be for the warm waters, surely. It's got to be.
There we go.
There we go. I was going to say it, but it's got to be. If I've learned one thing doing this podcast with you for 3 years, it's definitely that people don't like the cold water in Cape Town. They do like the warm water in the Indian Ocean, but I guess that's not what they're selling. Right. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Right, number 7. This is an interesting one because, again, we're going east to West Africa. So this is Abuja to Nairobi. So, Theo, number 7, let's talk about this one.
So number 7 from Abuja, the capital, the political capital of Nigeria, to Nairobi, a major hub in East Africa. Both cities have a combined population of about 10 million inhabitants. There's a lot of diplomatic traffic, trade with the Pan-African organizations in Nairobi. We have the UN offices for Africa there. So yeah, 2 big cities. There's a bit of tourism, I would say, not much, but it's traffic is mostly focused on government and business work. Most of the traffic now is routing through Addis or through Kigali as an intermediate stop. We have so far around 24 passengers per day each way, and applying the stimulation factor, we would expect around 40 passengers per day each way. And this would also justify 3 weekly flights on a 100-seater.
Fantastic. Right. Sean, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
I think this one is a market that the simulation factor may actually exceed what Theo has modeled. It may not even necessarily just be for O&D, but if you're able to connect Abuja to a hub like Nairobi with appropriate connections onwards to India, to China, etc., we have seen how Abuja reacts when other airlines go into there. You see a boost on O&D. I mean, Abuja to Kigali was non-existent until Rwanda went into the market, and suddenly it went from 0 to a few thousand passengers overnight with virtually zero latent demand on O&D. I think that Kenya is somewhere that Nigerians are. I mean, there's still not a very easy way for them to get there, but it's something that they would definitely have an interest in going to for tourism traffic and so forth. VFR is not significant, but tourism in particular could be stimulated through that. So I think the main challenge that we have here is, once again, this is a approximately 2,000 nautical mile segment, and KQ is handicapped by having altitude restrictions at Nairobi. So departing from Nairobi and making it non-stop to Abuja is something that a current 190, which KQ has, they've tried it before, if I'm not mistaken. They have flown Nairobi Abuja on the E190 and struggled from payload restrictions too badly that it had to cut. They've experimented with different ways of serving that market through Lagos, but obviously Lagos domestic to international connections are good through Accra. There was an agreement right before COVID. I think in February of 2020 we signed an agreement with Kenya Airways when I was at Africa World Airlines to interline passengers with a focus on Abuja, but obviously COVID intervened. So it's definitely something that is on their wish list. I think KQ's got a much wider set of problems right now than looking at expansion into these I won't say marginal, but more niche markets than core slam dunks. But I think that in the right situation, and again, if KQ had E2s on orders, I would put this down as one of the first routes they would probably get into. Unfortunately, they can't really afford to do much right now, but it is a route that I think has a lot more potential than many of the others on the list, because there is a latent demand out there, and I found that Nigeria, and Abuja in particular, is very prone to stimulation of tourism and tourism traffic in particular, regardless of where to.
Sean, you made a good comment regarding the fact that actually you would expect here the stimulation factor to be higher, and I just wanted to highlight that the stimulation curve we've put in place is really focused on the point-to-point traffic. So we're not considering the potential stimulation which could come out of connecting traffic. And as you mentioned, with Nairobi being a strong hub, we could expect then passenger to be connecting and therefore the stimulated traffic to be much higher. So yeah, just wanted to make this clarification.
On a borderline where the existing OND of about 25 ppdw is good enough to actually sustain a 3-weekly service, probably in its own right, just as is. The stimulation that you get naturally from this is right. There was the right airline with the right equipment and the right commercial acumen. I think this could have been a route that was already served, but unfortunately we haven't had that on either the Kenyan or the Nigerian side recently.
Okay. Behramjee, anything to add on this one?
Yes, a few things. Firstly, Abuja, Nairobi, to me, if Kenya Airways had ordered the E2s, would be a no-brainer. No-brainer. Like literally a no-brainer for an E2, E95 service, either 5-weekly or even daily, when you take into account the point-to-point traffic demand as well as the connection possibilities via Nairobi. If you look at the data which I have, Abuja Nairobi point-to-point traffic grew by 20% year over year from 21,000 to 26,000. But more importantly, the yield of Abuja and Nairobi, which is about $655 one way, with YQ included, that is the highest yield for any medium haul destination out of Nairobi, which goes to show that not only is there's a lot of premium traffic, but even the economy class passengers that are flying this route are paying very, very high fares. And without any direct service, the point-to-point market was grew by 20% year over year. So if Kenya Airways had an E2, E95 especially, this route would be a perfect candidate for that for that airplane, and it can easily be sustained on a 124-seater E95 E2.
Sorry,
So,
Behramjee, let me add one
sure.
thing to that as well, which is that, especially in Abuja and a lot of Nigerian secondary markets, you find that the OND numbers, because so many passengers book separate tickets and fly to Lagos on a domestic and then use Lagos to wherever, out of that 24 passengers, you can probably add another 6 to 10 per day as the hidden OND in there who are actually flying from Abuja to Nairobi, but are having to connect through Lagos on separate tickets because there isn't a single carrier that's offering a direct service via Lagos. So definitely, I think this one is definitely on my higher up on the list than some of the others, which may have numbers.
Yeah, I think that's good commentary. All right, fantastic. Right, we're getting into the top 6 now. So let's go to number 6, and we'll come to you first on this, Behramjee, but after Theo's given us a little bit of background. So that is Bamako to Brazzaville. So Brazzaville makes a second appearance. So talk to us about this, Theo, and then Behramjee can fill us in.
Yeah, so we are back to a West Central African link with Bamako in Mali to Brazzaville in Congo, around 3,100 kilometers. We see this route as mostly focused on the demand coming from humanitarian, NGO, and diplomatic travel. Tourism is currently limited, but could improve. Also, a lot of VFR traffic. There are a lot of Malians who are working in Congo. No direct flight, obviously, with a high security routing being required, traveling from one place to another. But so far, around 26 passengers per day each way. Applying the stimulation factor, we could expect roughly 43 passengers per day each way. And again, 3 weekly flights with a 100-seater.
Behramjee, any chance? Anyone that can do this? Any insights?
Yes, the insight is unlike other markets, this one is more VFR than traders. There's a huge Malian community in the Congo, Brazzaville country. Majority of them live in the Brazzaville area, more so than Point Noir. And there are two airlines that used to fly this route. Only one of them is doing it right now, but in a haphazard way, and that is Air Mauritania. They fly Nouakchott, Dakar, Bamako, Cotonou, Brazzaville, and a year or two ago, Transair of Senegal was also flying in. But as we all know, Air Mauritania is not a very reliable carrier, so I would expect now majority of the passengers would be flying ASky or Air Cote d'Ivoire. Unfortunately, Mali nor Congo has a proper national carrier as well. So I don't see the possibility of anybody flying it non-stop in the near future. They will continue to fly one stop via either Lomé or Abidjan. Definitely, this route has volume potential and could be even further boosted with a non-stop service. But unfortunately, we have a handicap situation with both countries not having viable, well-run airlines. So the passengers have to suffer by flying one stop instead of direct.
Yeah. And that's the thing with Lomé and Abidjan being hubs, and obviously geographically it kind of makes sense here in terms of you're on the way.
It's on the way.
It's not ideal.
Yes.
It's on the way. Sean, your thoughts on this? Any chance to add?
No, I think it's a good point to be made, and I think this applies to all of these, as Theo calls them, West to Central Africa routes, is that historically, even though these may have been served directly, they are served direct with intermediate stops. And I think, where we may not have the direct, even with intermediate stops now in some cases, the hubs which have developed, and I mean, Lomé obviously is the number one hub. Air Cote d'Ivoire has an ambition of developing Abidjan into a potential hub there. Everyone has the ambition of doing it. One is executed, one's trying to execute. But, there is no shame in having a daily connection through a hub versus having a once or twice weekly nonstop flight. The nonstop flight, the key thing, and, if you read Theo's report, you'll actually see a quote from me over there, which is, you need to right size your aircraft because you can fly a smaller plane twice, but you can't fly only half of a larger plane. And I think that's where it's so important for planes, for African airlines in particular, to regurgitate another catchphrase of mine. You have to stop defining success as flying half empty wide bodies from your home base to London or Paris or Dubai. Sometimes success is getting the right sized aircraft and flying it 3-4 times a week and, feeding it to a hub and then feeding it from a hub to wherever else. And, the African airlines which have realized that are the ones who are successful. There is in fact, I'd say is a list of 0 of African airlines which have succeeded purely on the basis of point-to-point traffic. They have all succeeded because they've been able to build up hubs. And that goes for Ethiopian, goes for ASky, goes for Airlink, goes for all of these guys. They are primarily hub carriers, connecting people through 1 or 2 strong hubs. And, I think this kind of a market, Bamako to Brazzaville, is optimally served through hubs until it reaches a certain critical mass where the nonstop offers it. And, that kind of critical mass is not going to serve the kind of traffic that is currently on this route. These are not routes that are easily prone to stimulation as much as, potential vacation routes and things like that. So, yeah. I'm not entirely convinced, but I'm just saying this is, to avoid repeating myself every time, I'm just going to say this is something that I see the pattern in multiple such routes, as Theo has highlighted as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Sean just mentioned regarding the hubs. Actually, in the report, we have a section which is about hub connectivity, and we are doing a benchmark of different hubs around the world. So there's a lot of successful hubs in Africa, right? But what we see is there's a big potential to increase the connectivity at a hub. Typically, you would measure connectivity or how efficient a hub is by the daily frequencies per destination, which translates directly into how many hubs, how many waves you're going to have at the hub. And we see around the world, big successful hubs have 2 to 3 daily frequencies per destination on average. And there's a potential to increase these frequencies in African hubs. And just to finish on the hub, I would also highlight that I was checking these numbers a few weeks ago. And currently, if we look at intercontinental traffic out of Africa, only 39% of the traffic is done by African carriers. So most of it is captured by foreign carriers. So if African airlines can develop their hubs, then they will be able to compete more effectively with foreign carriers.
Okay, at the risk of going slightly off topic, I'm going to say that while 39% of the demand is being carried by African passengers, the reality is that over 70% of the demand is being generated from the European or the American or wherever else point of sale. So African carriers are actually punching above their weight in terms of the total amount of demand on those routes that is generated from within Africa. The majority of traffic, in fact, 2/3 of the traffic coming to and from Africa is generated from outside Africa coming to Africa rather than the other way around. But on the flip side, if you take that 39% and exclude Ethiopian, you're probably down to about 15%. So, it does go both ways.
And you would also have to exclude all the traffic from North Africa to Europe, right? Which is also included in that. But slightly off topic.
Yeah. No.
Yes,
and this is what's so fascinating. Yeah, very off topic, absolutely. But this is what's so fascinating, there are so many different ways. Yes, a direct connection is one option, but in its absence, there are obviously the hub, the African hubs, which is great versus them having to go to Paris, right, to get from Bamako to Brazzaville. It's still preferable, and it's good that these African airlines and their model, like you say, Askai with the 737s, it has to be based on that because of the capacity and the gauge of the aircraft. So there is opportunity here, and there's so many different ways of getting from point A to point B. Right, we're into the top 5 now. I'm going to come back to you, Behramjee, first on this one, after Theo's given us a little bit of background into Cotonou in Benin to Dakar in Senegal. Dakar again making a appearance here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So number 5, Dakar to Cotonou, 2,300 kilometers. So slightly shorter route than the other ones we've seen so far. These are 2 francophone hubs with a combined population of over 6 million inhabitants and quite strong diplomatic ties. We see a lot of trade between the 2 countries in cotton, also a lot of in terms of transport services. We're seeing that Dakar is growing quite a lot lately in fintech. That's quite an interesting thing I noted. The VFR traffic is moderate, but also there's quite a lot of student travel, which is adding to seasonal demand. Passengers are currently flying through Lomé or Abidjan. So far, around 30 passengers per day each way, which once stimulated with a direct service, we could expect around 50 passengers per day each way. We believe this market could sustain 4 weekly flights on a 120-seater.
Okay. Do you agree with this, Behramjee? What's your thoughts on this one?
I fully agree with Theo. And just to add some more background into this route, Dakar-Cotonou is a very baggage-heavy route also. It has about 24,000 passengers on an annual basis, round trip, point to point alone. But majority of these passengers are traders. They go there because Cotonou has a very attractive port when it comes to importing goods into the West African region. A lot of incentives, and that's why a lot of Central African traders also get their goods from Cotonou port, though now Point Noir and Libreville are slowly starting to catch up. But anyways, Cotonou-Dakar, currently Air Senegal flies it 3 times a week via Abidjan because of aircraft issues. Previously, when I was there, we used to fly it non-stop 5 times a week, but extended onwards to Central Africa, as I previously mentioned. But definitely for an E95, E2 sized airplane, this route makes perfect sense. If Air Senegal had ordered those airplanes 4 times a week, connecting via Dakar to Bamako, Conakry, Nouakchott, Casablanca, a no-brainer. The E95 can take all their baggage also. It won't be 100% full all the time, but even if it's 80% full, it's fine. You can carry 205, 200 suitcases, so no issues whatsoever. So I fully agree with Theo. 4 times a week, E95, E2, Dakar, Cotonou would make sense, with the transit traffic included.
Okay, great. The challenge here is the airline with the aircraft, you think, is the thing. Right. Sean, what do you think?
Yes, but apparently, sorry, just one thing. Republic of Benin last week announced they want to start a new national carrier.
That was one of my points.
I don't know if they have enough deep pockets. Oh, okay. But I don't know if they have enough deep pockets for
my understanding, and I'm sure we'll mention this more on our connectivity podcast next week, is that they're looking at forming Amazon Bonin Airlines, which seems to be primarily driven by private sector, and government is just simply, giving it a bit of a boost and incentive, and maybe taking a bit of the equity on it. And honestly, another thing which we have forgotten, and that was the second point that I was mentioning here, Cotonou is actually a very good proxy airport for Nigeria. And given that Dakar to Lagos currently does not have any traffic, there are a lot of people who would fly to Lagos using Cotonou as an option, because Cotonou to Lagos is a three and a bit hour drive, depending how long it takes you at the border. And a lot of people, especially from the western, points west of Lagos, there's not a huge amount of distance to the border from the west of Lagos, use Cotonou in view of Lagos when they're traveling to Francophone destinations because of better connectivity in Cotonou. So I do again see that potentially there is, of all the Francophone routes over here, I think this is one where the stimulation might actually come from areas we haven't quite considered, because Cotonou has shown itself time and time again to be an acceptable proxy for the huge Lagos catchment area in markets where Lagos does not have its own non-stop flights. So, yeah, interesting to see. I would definitely say that this one can sustain itself on OND. It doesn't necessarily have to have the network feed. You put a 190, maybe an airline into Benin, an existing E1 190. It doesn't even have to be an E2, the range is not really going to be that critical. So 190, 195 can do this route, and it could potentially even be profitable within a very short window. So yeah, if you guys at Amazon Benin want some more analysis on this, I'm available. Links in link down in the foot show notes.
Nice. Very good. Some good punts there. Right, fantastic. We've got 4 left, and the next one's really interesting because we have discussed this on the podcast, and it's one that I'm sure at the E2 will be part of the conversation here, and that is Cape Town to Lagos. This has been discussed for quite some time. So, Theo, talk to us first about some of the context, and then I think I'll let Sean go first on this one.
So number 4 from Cape Town to Lagos was 780 kilometers. This route links South Africa's leisure capital, Cape Town, with Nigeria's business hub, Lagos. Over 20 million people combined. We see a lot of trade in tech, in FMCG, oil services. So it is really a strong business route. But we also see some people from Lagos traveling to Cape Town for tourism or shopping, and the reverse traffic from Cape Town to Lagos is more focused on business. We also see to some extent student and medical passengers. The current flows are mostly through Johannesburg and to some extent through Addis Ababa. So far, 45 passengers per day each way, and applying stimulation factor, we could expect around 66 passengers per day each way, which would also justify around 4 weekly flights with a 120-seater.
Perfect. Sean, tell us what you've not already told us.
Here's 100 Rand. If we do not see an announcement of the Cape Town to Lagos route by the end of 2026 by Airlink, this 100 Rand will go to charity of anybody's choice. I'm willing to be that confident that this is a route that will open up in 2026. Now, granted, I've spoken to Airlink about it, and they've pretty much confirmed it without saying that it's confirmed. If there was a route that the E2 was made for, this is the textbook route for it. It is a route that there is no logical hub that can connect it in a straight line, so it does cry out for service. It is a route where there is a market that exists for business, so a good 2-class configuration with a nice staggered seating concept that the E2 does can be very competitive. It is a route where Airlink, as a decent hub network operator in Cape Town, granted it's not necessarily a hub for them yet, but they do have a network from Cape Town to major destinations. It is a sea level to sea level route. I mean, if you could tick every single box as to why this route makes sense for the E2, this is the route that you would say is the textbook. So yes, I will go so far as to say this will be announced during 2026 by Airlink as soon as they have a firm timeline for their 2-class E2s for delivery and entry into service for those. It will happen, not if, but when.
How exciting. And this is another one for you, Behramjee, as well. In terms of the stimulation factor. I mean, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, this could outperform that as well. But, what do you think? You pretty bullish on this too?
I am 110% bullish on this route. I would just like, Theo, can you just state in simple English for everybody viewing this podcast, the E95E2 can fly Cape Town to Lagos non-stop. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So now that we have confirmation that it can fly a 6-hour flight non-stop, I would just like to surprise some people on how this market has grown beyond expectations. Lagos to Cape Town last year, as per the data that I have, was 59,000 passengers for the whole year, point to point only. It grew from 47,000 to 59,000 year over year. Not only did it grow in passenger numbers, it even grew in average fare, which is very, very uncommon, where you have a route where not only did the average yield go up, but even the passenger number go up without a direct service. The average fare on Lagos to Cape Town last year was $496 one way with YQ included. It grew by 10% year over year. So if you have a market of 59,000 passengers just purely on point to point, plus Airlink would be able to connect via Cape Town to domestic South Africa and plus within few cities in the Southern African belt. This route is a no-brainer for a 4-weekly or even 5-weekly direct flight between the two cities using an E95E2. I'm very confident about it. Airlink should also be, and they should fast-track this launch as soon as possible, as soon as the dual-class E95E2s come into play. Because and the passenger profile on this route, like John and Theo had mentioned, it's a complete mix. You have those high middle class, upper middle class Nigerians wanting to Cape Town for a leisure holiday. You have a bit of business, very little government traffic, some student traffic as well. But it's a very good mix, and the volume is there. One thing which I will say though, Airlink can make this route profitable and work. Air Peace or any Nigerian carrier cannot.
All right, big statement. Theo, you want to say
That
something?
is true for pretty much
No, I was going to ask Behramjee why.
pretty much any route other than London. I mean, Air Peace has had a classic record of touching anything and it turning to mud, with the exception of their UK routes. So, I mean, I think that's more a reflection of Airlink being extremely good at what they do and Air Peace historically having been extremely bad at what they do. Thankfully, Air Peace is getting a bit more professional thanks to Noel having joined them and friend of the show, friend of AviaDev in there. But I think there may still be, who knows? Maybe we'll have an E2 versus E2 head-to-head showdown on Lagos to Cape Town when the time comes. I'd be excited to see that. So, cage match. De Villiers and Allen down in Ikeja cage match. I'd pay for that.
Me too. Yeah, no, very interesting. We've been proved wrong there with Air Peace before as well. So, yeah, good. Shout out to Noel. Let's see what can happen. But, yeah, all roads and all direction is pointing towards Airlink at the moment. Right, top three, and then we are done for today. So number 3, again, we're going central to West Africa. So this is showing those strength of those hubs. So Dakar to Libreville. Theo, talk us through it, and then Behramjee can start us off on this one.
Yep. So number 3 from Dakar to Libreville, 3,310 kilometers. So 2 francophone West and Central African capitals with a total population of over 5 million combined. We see trade in oil, services, in construction, also in banking industry, which is really driving business traffic between the two cities. Also quite strong VFR links due to the diaspora living in both countries. Also a lot of banks and multinational organization in both capitals, which is boosting premium cabin demand. Currently, most of the traffic is routing through Abidjan, Bamako, or Cotonou. So far, 47 passengers per day each way. When applying stimulation factor, we could expect around 68 passengers per day each way, which would also justify around 4 weekly flights with a 120-seater.
Perfect. So another one in your wheelhouse, Behramjee. Over to you.
Thank you. Yes, the numbers match up to what I have. This route has grown from strength to strength post-COVID in particular. The type of passengers that fly this route are a mix of everything, as Theo correctly mentioned: government, student traffic, leisure packs from Gabon coming to Senegal for holiday, VFR as well, a lot of Senegalese people living in Gabon and vice versa. But also it's a baggage-heavy route. where passengers take two-piece baggage. So definitely an E95 E2 is ideally suited for this route 3 to 4 times a week. But again, unfortunately, Air Senegal does not have that aircraft. However, AfriJet is looking to expand. We don't know what their future plans are. They're very focused and disciplined, touchwood, unlike the majority of African carriers. But we don't know if AfriJet has any plans to expand into the small narrow body segment as yet. But if they do, the E95, E2, and even the E90 E2 would work for them on majority of their routes, which within the CMAC and West Africa region, as the demand is there. Plus, their geographical location of Libreville as a hub to connect Central Africa to West Africa and Johannesburg is also very ideally suited. So yeah, I would say Air Senegal will not be ordering E95 E2s for sure. But if AfriJet does and develops Libreville as a more bigger hub for transit traffic between the different regions of Africa, definitely I see potential in them getting this aircraft for this route.
Great. And I think we call them Fly Gabon, do we now? It's AfriJet, but it's Fly Gabon, right?
This is it.
People know them.
They are
People know
currently
them more
flying
as
at 320. Well, they're trying to change that. I think that's the entire point of the government's involvement in AfriJet. And yeah, it's on ACMI. It's from Global. But, hey, if they really want to make a connection from Libreville to Dakar, there's solid O&D, and there is a lack of non-stop service between South Africa and Senegal as well, which is a strong enough market that Gabon is literally on the way to serve. So potential lies there. I think, again, if you think a bit outside the box and try to develop something more than just a government mandated, you must fly to Johannesburg kind of thing, and say, hey, we actually may want to be successful, that is an option for them. But as John says, we're not quite sure what name they have, let alone their strategy right now.
Yeah, I think there's been changes as well at the airline, but it seems like there's a good potential Embraer E2 customer in West Africa with Air Senegal. If they can get themselves together, there's lots of routes they could potentially fly. So, a bit of work for the Embraer sales team to do over there. I'm sure you've been knocking on those doors.
Right,
let's get into the top two. Now this one is particularly.
That's the challenge.
All right, we'll leave that bit there, but totally appreciated. All right, so number 2, very exciting, Lusaka in Zambia to Cape Town. So Cape Town again making its third appearance in the top 10 at number 2. But of course, there is some developments here. But before we get to those, Theo, talk us through the context of this one.
Indeed. So this is it's quite an interesting one. So Lusaka to Cape Town, 2,300 kilometers. Lusaka, population of around 3 million. Cape Town, around 5 million. It is quite an important Southern African link. Zambia and South Africa have strong bilateral air service agreements. We see mining and agricultural trade flows just supporting business travel on this route. Cape Town is an important touristic destination for Zambians, so leisure travel is rising, but we also see students and medical travel, which are contributing to demand on this route. There is currently no direct flight. There is one through Livingstone with a ProFlight Zambia, but no direct flight. It's a route which was operated in 2024 direct, which was then dropped, and with a demand for around 50 passengers per day each way. We believe, based on current demand, I'll let Behramjee and Jon comment on this, that it could sustain 4 weekly flights with a 120-seater.
All right, Sean, let me come to you first.
I completely agree that I am actually shocked that there is no non-stop service in this market today. This is actually the kind of route where Airlink, with its suite of, different sized Embraer products, charging from the 135, 140, which obviously can't do this route non-stop. It's actually, what is it? It is
3 hours, 20 minutes.
50 nautical miles. Yeah, 1,250 nautical miles. So something beyond the range of the 135, 140, but well within the wheelhouse of the 170, 175, 190, 195 legacy. Forget about the E2s. And again, it's a sea level departure from Cape Town, so no real payload restrictions or anything else. I'm actually shocked that they haven't been able to make that route a success. But then I looked a bit deeper into the numbers, and this is the 2025 numbers, Behramjee, that we've been looking at. And what really shocked me is that in 2025, the market leader by a long way has become South African Airways from Cape Town via Johannesburg into Lusaka. And then you look into the yields on it, and the reality is that the yields, South African Airways' yields have dropped by a significant amount. Well, the average market yield has actually dropped by over 20% between Cape Town and Lusaka, primarily because South African Airways, which has had the lower yields in the market, has been winning more and more of the market share. And I think that may be a big reason why Airlink has been a bit reluctant in terms of committing into that market, because they're going to find it very hard to compete on price with a non-stop service versus South African Airways. Effectively, I won't say crash selling the market, but their base fares is just over $100 each way between Cape Town and Lusaka via Johannesburg. And I think that when you look in terms of the competition and the yield is one of the reasons why this market may have struggled to support the non-stop service that the volumes very clearly demand. The yields may actually be a bit too low to support that non-stop service, which, obviously is something that needs to be in there. So it's an interesting twist in that market, but, it is a market that I think if you get it right, it is a slam dunk win for whoever can make it work, whether that's going to be ProFlight upgauging, 200 to say a 700 or a 900 nonstop, should they choose to do that, whether it's going to be Airlink or whether it's going to be SAA themselves, who, may deploy an A320 on that route a few times a week, or maybe with their new partnership with Semair. That could be an international route where, where Semair takes over flying it. So lots of options, it just goes to show that this is a good market and crying out to be served.
Yeah, one to watch for sure. Behramjee, your thoughts on this one?
My only thought is that the volume is there. It's 50,000 passengers point to point on an annual basis, Cape Town to Lusaka, 3 hours, 20 minutes block time. So as Sean correctly said, only the classic Embraer E-Series, E7570 or E90 is perfectly suited for this on a multiple weekly basis. Even on a daily basis with an E90 is fine. But the yields which South African Airways provide via Johannesburg are a bit too unsustainable for Airlink to warrant flying it direct and having a higher fare, as the passengers don't seem to be willing to pay that small premium to fly non-stop. But the market is there, but unfortunately due to some predatory pricing tactics of the national carrier, we don't get to see the convenience of a direct flight. Let's see.
Behramjee, it's not a small premium. We're talking a 60%
nighttime incremental flying. So unless Airlink does a nighttime flight just for incremental utilization purposes and wants to just cover operating cash costs, that's a different story altogether. But the market definitely does exist for a direct flight, no doubt.
All right. Sorry, Sean, what were you saying?
No, Behramjee said it's a small premium. It's not a small premium. It's a 60% premium. The average fare on Airlink and ProFlight is 60% higher than the average fare on South African Airways. And, that's the kind of thing which moves markets. 10%, 20% people will pay for premium. No one in their right mind is going to pay, especially not VFR traffic, of which there is a significant chunk of this market is VFR. It's students, it's Zambians working, stuff like that, flying back and forth. They're not going to pay 60% more when, for an extra 2 hours they get to connect via Johannesburg. They'll quite happily take that, and fly with SA, which has a good product. So certainly this may be a route with unsustainable pricing, but in general, SAA gives a very good value on its product, for what you're paying for. So as a consumer, I would love seeing that kind of cheap pricing. As an airline executive, I hate it. So yeah, pick one.
Yeah, fair enough. Depends which side of the table you're on. Absolutely. Right, that brings us to number one. So we're going to unveil for you the number one unserved route, direct route, and that is, drum roll please, Abidjan to Douala. So, Theo, talk us through it, and then I think Behramjee can kick us off on this last one.
So, yeah, number one is Abidjan to Douala. It's actually the shortest route in terms of distance from the top 10, 1,500 kilometers. Surprisingly, no direct non-stop route. This is connecting two of West and Central Africa largest Francophone cities, serving over 10 million combined inhabitants. Both countries, Côte d'Ivoire and Cameroon, are members of CEMAC and ECOWAS, trade in cocoa, palm oil, in industrial goods. All these are stimulating business traffic, but also there's a growing tourism links between both countries, which highlights the high potential for VFR traffic. It is currently served with Air Côte d'Ivoire with a stop in Abuja. which last year was capturing most of the traffic, around 85%, and the remaining passengers transfer mostly through Lomé. So far, around 50 passengers per day each way. After stimulation, we would expect a bit over 70 passengers per day each way, which would be sufficient to sustain 5 weekly flights on a 120-seater.
Fantastic. So Behramjee, when are Cam starting?
Not anytime soon. Douala, Abidjan, Air Cotonou flies, but they don't fly direct. Some days they fly Abidjan, Abuja, Yaoundé, Douala. Some days they fly Abidjan, Yaoundé, Douala. So some days it's 2 stops, some days it's 1 stop. But this route, though it has 46,000 passengers point to point, is an ideal route for their new E75s once it gets delivered to them. Right now, obviously, they can't sustain Yaoundé and Douala on their own using a A319 or even an A320. That's why they have a multi-stop service. But the E75 is an ideally sized aircraft for Air Cotonou in the future to consider flying Abidjan, Douala, Abidjan non-stop, therefore providing convenient one-stop access via Abidjan to their West Africa network and Paris in the future.
All right, fantastic. Sean?
Okay. I'm actually, Behramjee's on the ground there, so you can tell me whether my GDS is showing me something wrong. But Kenya Airways is flying this with the 190 with Fifth Freedom traffic rights.
Yes,
I do remember Kenya Airways a few months ago. Yeah, but it is a market that is being served night. It may be doing poorly, but as I said, this is a market that is currently being served. Yeah, it's at 4:00 in the morning out of Abidjan, and it's not the best timings for that. And certainly because of that, and because of Fifth Freedom, and because KQ's reliability at this point in time is pretty piss poor, I can imagine it's not doing particularly well. But this is a market. Well, as I said, why would you?
Is this new?
Yeah, I just started 2 months ago.
When they pulled the 737 out of Abidjan, they started flying the 190. Nairobi, Douala, Abidjan. And so I'm like, how are we missing the point here that there is actually an Embraer 190 flying this route, albeit not very successfully because of the scheduling limitations, but it is up there. And I think, if nothing else, it just goes to show that there are a lot of options in this market. But it also goes to show that sometimes just having the numbers in that market is not going to lead to success. The numbers, it's not always if you build it, they will come. It is if you build the right thing, they will come. And that means you're going to have safety, you're going to have reliability, you're going to have affordability, you're going to have a schedule that works. And all these things what come together to make the right product offering, which a consumer is going to pull the trigger on versus one of your competitors. Because if you look at that market, the bulk of the passengers are choosing to fly. Even today, even after KQ's come back into that market, they're choosing to fly a one-stop option on Air Cote d'Ivoire for a variety of reasons relative to KQ's current middle of the night, few times a week, non-stop flight that does not provide the value proposition that the consumer is looking for. So, if there's nothing else that comes out of this 1+ hour discussion on this subject, it is sometimes you've got to do it right rather than just doing it.
I think that's a great way to close off the analysis. So thank you, Sean and Behramjee, for bringing your analysis and commentary. I think this went really well in terms of giving a bit of context to the report. I'd love to get some final sort of takeaways, feedback, remarks from you, Theo, before we let everybody go. But yeah, over to you.
Yeah, well, I think it was a very, very interesting discussion. I was happy to hear from Behramjee and Sean their unfiltered comments. It's also good to see that some of the routes have already been picked by some airlines and are being flown direct. I think during the next AviaDev, we will be revisiting this report and presenting what has been changing. So just a few remarks on my side. I think the reason why this report is so important, so interesting, it's because it really highlights the connectivity potential in the region. We have discussed, first of all, of the new routes. So we present 45 routes which are currently not flown by anyone. So this is what we call a blue ocean, so new opportunities where there is no competition. And this usually for airlines means high yield. Then second important aspect of the report, which we've briefly mentioned, is the potential to enhance connectivity at the hubs. There's a big potential to increase frequencies, which means more options for the passengers. And this is also another lever to enhance connectivity in the region. Just to summarize, I think also for this needs the right aircraft. Behramjee and Jon have given some examples where the Embraer are the right aircraft for these routes. So we are convinced at Embraer that the E-Jets family with aircraft going up to 150 seats are a perfect fit for this kind of applications, opening new routes at a low risk because of the lowest trip cost. You need less passengers to break even. And then if the route goes well, then you can upgauge to a larger aircraft, and that's how you develop your market and your routes. And also, we haven't discussed about this, but also in Africa, we see the challenge with improving the load factors. So by also having the right aircraft, you will also improve your load factors and your profitability. So overall, we are very optimistic. The African continent, we've been present, as I was saying, since 1978 with a great future outlook. And yeah, we're very happy to be here supporting African airlines, growing their market and improving their profitability. So yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Jon. It was nice to have this discussion with you, Jon, and Behramjee.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Theo. Great way to finish it off. And we are seeing the low factors creep up, and we've talked about this for years, and it's been on every piece of marketing I've seen for Embraer for 10 years, talking about right sizing and talking about using the right tool for the job. And of course, Embraer's got that suite of products. So really, really great to have you all with us today. Thanks everybody out there for listening. A quick reminder to say that the link to download the report for free is there in the link in the show notes. Even more excitingly, Embraer are going to release an updated version of this report, and that will be premiered on the stage in Gaborone in Botswana, 10th to 12th of June. We're just finalizing exactly the date and time of that. But if you want to be first to hear who's going to make that top 10, who's going to make that top 45 or 50 or however big that market may be now, then make sure that you are coming to AviaDev, you're registered, you've got your ticket, and we will see you there in June. We will be back very soon for our connectivity update. So if you did enjoy the episode, do subscribe, share it with somebody in your network you think would benefit from having a listen. Thank you all for your wonderful attention, and we'll see you for the next episode very soon. Take care, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.